What are some common issues that arise when founders of a company contribute intellectual property to the company in exchange for an ownership interest in the company? Now, this scenario is extremely common. It's all too common that individuals who found a new company or startup venture start working towards that objective early on, and they create valuable intellectual property that later, when they ultimately form a business entity, they contribute that intellectual property that they've created, any trade secrets, any copyrighted material, any trademark material, and just general work product. They transfer that to the new entity in exchange for an ownership interest in the business entity. Now, that transfer gives rise to a number of issues that can pop up. First of all, if you have individuals that are simply contributing the intellectual property that they've generated together, no issues really arise. But what happens when you have individuals who contribute cash? Some contribute intellectual property that they've previously created, and others simply agree to invest time and effort or work towards earning their ownership interest. This can give rise to all sorts of scenarios. So the first is, one, how do you value the intellectual property in comparison to the work generated by someone contributing work? How do you value it compared to cash that someone else is contributing? Because generally the value that you contribute is going to represent the percentage of ownership of the company that you receive in exchange for that value you've contributed. So valuing the intellectual property up front is a real issue. Next, you need to make certain you execute all the transfer agreements, which are intellectual property agreements, any potential non-disclosure, non-compete agreements, and then you need to take the steps to actually transfer registration of that ownership if you've done things like filed a patent application in your own name and now you're transferring that over to a business entity. If you've recorded a copyright in your name and now need to transfer that over. It's less of an issue for trade secrets. Trademarks the same way. If you've registered a trademark, that needs to be transferred over to the business entity. And then next, tax issues. The initial scenario that I presented where you have individuals contributing work, you have contributing intellectual property, and you have contributing money. In this scenario, it can give rise to tax implications. That is, the individuals receiving an ownership interest in the company in exchange for their work, the work that they put in to earn that interest, can receive a tax bill based upon the value of the intellectual property and the money that is contributed by the other founders. Now, to avoid the situation where this individual creating work, that they're treating the ownership interest in the company as compensation and thus taxable, you have to make certain that you're documenting the value of the assets and you're structuring the transaction appropriately to avoid these tax repercussions. How to transfer these transactions can be quite complicated and is outside the scope of what we're talking about in this video. But please understand that it is an important issue that you have to address that goes to the heart of issues in valuation and the formalities of transferring intellectual property into the business entity in exchange for your ownership interest in the business entity.